Hey, Andrew from Kensington Wine Market here. I'm here with Bryce Parsons from Bear Hill Brewing, I guess is the parent company, but what we're really here to talk about is kind of where you guys are going with your whiskey, which is the Maligne Range. People may not know, but like you guys have been distilling now for almost a decade, about 8+ years. You started in Fort McMurray, you were distilling in Calgary at Last Best, you're still distilling there. Plans are to build a distillery in Jasper. Why don't you give us a bit of background on where Bear Hill and Maligne, like what the background is, where you came from? Because I think that sort of informs where you're going.
Yeah, how they fit in. I guess simplicity's sake, we throw around. Yes, I'm from Bear Hill, but really that's the umbrella company that there is. It's not a customer facing company. We let traditionally our brew pubs do that. So it first started in 2005 with Jasper Brewing. And then it went to Bath Ave Brewing, and in about 2010, shortly after that, for a brief stint, we were up in Fort McMurray. That was Wood Buffalo Brewing and Distilling. Now that's when kind of the distilling piece started to click in. We ended up putting a still in that location before distilling was allowed. When I mean distilling, small scale distilling.
Yeah, you're talking about the change that previously you had to be a very large distiller to get a license.
That's right.
And then the rules were changed around 2014-15, or was it a little earlier than that?
A little bit earlier. It was roughly about December 2013.
Okay.
So we're only about just over 10 years in, into this. So we, felt that the tide was turning to allow small producers to start getting into the distilling space. So a still was put there for the initial year and a bit. It wasn't hooked up. It was just a giant sculpture, kind of a paperweight type of thing. And then eventually when the notice came that we did, we had the first license under the small producers license for distilling. And we started, really just shortly after that. I think already the wash was already brewed and fermented, for that. So we dove into it, right away, and then we followed that with Last Best, which opened up May 2014. We ended up putting a still there.
Oh, so this is like 10th anniversary for Last Best coming up too.
It is, May 2024 will be our 10th anniversary. We opened up Mother's Day. So that's always the anniversary. So, once Last Best opened up, we of course were distilling in two places at that time, and we've been kind of quietly been squirreling away whiskey, for all these years, while we build out our brew pubs, while we build our brands, as well. One thing to note, we did close Wood Buffalo down in May 2019, but we opened up right afterwards. We opened up Campio Brewing in Edmonton, in I think it was October 2019 there. So we've been busy doing that, but while we've been doing all this, we've been doing whiskey as well.
Well, along the way, and this is I think where I kind of became familiar with you guys. Obviously, you were making local gins. And the cool thing I loved about Last Best, and which is still happening now, is I'm sure the majority of people that go in there for beer or food don't even notice that like crammed into a corner of the brewery portion is a still. And I obviously noticed this. We met probably, I'm guessing 2014 or 15 at some point.
Right in the initial,
And we've done some gin collaborations. And one of the things that, where that ties in with this is a whiskey that we made like years ago now and have been patiently waiting for it to hit maturity. But when we made that, there was no idea of like what branding it would be under. Like I just assumed it would probably be under Last Best, like Last Best whiskey. And I think what's cool is that you guys have sort of taken a bigger approach to this. You're looking to create, something more than just like a small, craft distillery. You want to create a brand that's like a world-renowned whiskey brand, and you're doing that with Maligne.
Yeah, and you're right. Your assumption that when we made this, so we made this was 2016, I believe. That's correct. The assumption is that this is going to be last best whiskey. I had labels in mind. We played around with it. We thought the name was cool. But we didn't really know anything else. And I think that the whole story with the Maligne Range is we kind of, over this period of time of aging, we've learned a little bit, and we've learned a little bit. And I think that's kind of cool about whiskey. While it's maturing, you could learn and you can adapt. But yeah, Maligne wasn't even a concept, wasn't even on the radar until maybe about 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So up until then, it was always last best, that we're going to release under, but then we pivoted.
Yeah. Well, and I think, the idea that you're taking here, so Maligne is obviously, I believe it's a mountain range in Jasper National Park.
That's right, yeah.
And so you've actually, the first two whiskeys, Tekarra and Excelsior, both named after mountains in that range, if I'm not mistaken.
They are, yeah. So, when we looked at doing the branding, and we also, over the period of time, when we started this, I'm not a marketer.
Yeah.
Putting a brand deck together, I'd fumble around. We invested in marketing.
Mm-hmm.
We got a team in that. So, one thing we learned that, yes, have a bit of a branding system,
mm-hmm.
That's there. And we knew there's an opportunity to base this brand out of Jasper. That's kind of how we based all our brands, right? With
mm-hmm.
our beer brands. Despite we're in different locations in the province, they all have different brands.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of cool, makes some things easier, makes a lot of things harder as well. But what we looked at is, a brand system, and, with especially being in the Rocky Mountains, what's more natural than using, a brand system around a mountain range. So yeah, the Maligne Range is a mountain range. Tekarra and Excelsior, two of those mountains. The upcoming releases will follow that theme.
Sure.
We have Mount Kirkeslin's within that. We have Watchtower, I believe. Curator is another mountain. So
mm-hmm.
there's a bunch in there that we could pull from,
mm-hmm.
and we'll continue that theme until that gets exhausted, and then we'll see what we do after that.
And I want to go back to your comment about, again, not knowing how you're going to brand the whiskeys. I mean, in some cases, your first release or your core release, Tekarra, in a lot of ways, you weren't even sure how you'd be allowed to classify that spirit when you first made it, because it's a little bit unique. It's Canadian whiskey, but there's a unique twist on it. And I mean, I just think that's kind of cool. A lot of the things with the company have been, we want to do something, this is cool, we'll do it, and then the regulation and all those things, they'll catch up later, kind of thing.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
Or at least trying to lead. I mean, but if you think about it from an innovation standpoint, you have to take a certain amount of risk with stuff like that, and maybe you want to start doing something, but maybe not be so overt about it, so that your competitors get a sense of what you're doing, or try to replicate it or duplicate it.
Yeah, I think with us is, I think when you're approaching things, and this I'll kind of more speak to me, coming in and working with this company, on trying to, what are we going to develop for whiskey? I think it was easy. What I was seeing in the market at the time was, we have a lot of people doing single malts,
mm-hmm.
right? And I love single malts. You love single malts.
Yeah.
But I was starting to see that, I wasn't really getting, what's the purpose? And I was trained in Scotland as well.
Mm-hmm.
What's the purpose of coming to Canada, doing exactly something that's happening in Scotland? Yeah, I get it. Different climate and maybe different grains and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But and you can make wonderful whiskeys. But there's another story to tell here. I was still actually, intrigued in my time overseas. I was amazed that there just wasn't people interested. And it's not because they weren't interested, they didn't like it. It's just they didn't know of what was happening, what could happen in Canada, right? So that was the start point of, let's explore this.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something that we kind of, a tagline that we go by right now is that, we're explorers making whiskey for explorers. You know, we're exploratory producers. And of course, we're going to appeal to exploratory drinkers.
Sure.
And so that's what kind of, you know, started our steps with, you know, exploring what could be done with Canadian whiskey. So, you know, when you're talking about Tekarra, where there is a bit of a twist, you know, in this whiskey, there's multiple components in it, but one component is actually demerara sugar. You know, that's in there in a very small quantity. You know, that's there, that was kind of, you know, you think about it, it's mashed, it's fermented, and it's aged entirely alongside with this whiskey being created. And you know, we pulled that, you know, from an imperial porter recipe that we were doing at the time. You know, of, you know, do we keep this in, you know, or do we remove it? And I think that's where we looked at it initially. It's like, well, let's keep it in. You know, let's kind of see here. That's a bit of a different component that's in there that we could see, we could explore. Really, that's it. You know, not knowing where it would go, you know, in the end.
Well, I think one of the things that allows you to do this, you talked about not wanting to just be another single malt distiller, and there are some single malt distillers in Canada that are making great whiskeys, but the rules around Canadian whiskey have a fair bit of latitude, and I think that latitude, which in some ways with some producers allows them to sort of doctor things, but that's not really the intent here. The intent here is you want to do something unique, something a little different, but still be kind of honoring the style of the spirit, still honoring the style of making proper whiskey.
That's right. Yeah, it wasn't a doctor or anything. It wasn't you know, it wasn't thought of as an adjunct, you know, kind of situation. You know, for us, it's you know, we're using majority wise, because we are brewers, you know, we're limited by what we can actually break down in our brew house. Most brewers, you know, typically use malt barley. So primarily what we do use is malt barley, but just like making beer, you add, you know, certain things there. So we use, in many instances, a lot of specialty malts. And then at times, you know, there'll be like a demerara sugar that we could kind of put in and stuff like that, and we monitor it to, you know, make sure though it still, you know, fits within the kind of, despite wide latitude of definition of Canadian whiskey, you know, but it's something I think that, you know, why not start utilizing to see where Canadian whiskey can go? You know, is there another level? Is there another chapter, you know, to Canadian whiskey? And I fundamentally think that's something that Canadian distillers, small Canadian distillers, I think that's a job that they should be looking at. You know, if we're going to get people interested in our whiskey. The large guys, or what I term as the legacy guys, they do wonderful stuff as well. They're pretty stuck in what they're doing. You know, they do it big. They're commoditized most of the time. You know, they kind of either just have one, maybe two streams, you know, of either mash bills or grain that they break down. So it leaves the small guys to be able to start exploring what's happening. Yeah.
Well, why don't we talk about the Tekarra specifically? Because I believe this was based on a mash bill for an imperial porter. So it's got malt, but I believe a small amount of wheat in there as well.
Yeah, but the wheat is roasted.
Yeah.
You know, so it doesn't add any really, you know, anything for like sugar wise and stuff like that. It'd be like using and I guess
that's a trigger warning for, I guess, people with celiac.
Yeah.
but just to the style, you're talking like this is it malted wheat? And malted, or is this
roasted?
Roasted, okay.
Roasted wheat, yeah. Right. So similar to how you would make a stout with roasted barley.
Sure.
This is just roasted wheat. Yeah. In brewery formulation, typically sometimes with using the roasted wheat, you get away from some of the bitter or the acrid flavors that come from roasted barley.
Sure.
So anyway.
So it's a way of adding those darker flavors without actually getting too bitter and
that's right. Yeah. Now, granted, we don't really have to approach it that way in whiskey production because, of course, you're distilling. So you know there's a threshold that's crossed over. You know when this goes from liquid to vapor. But you know, as part of the recipe that we liked, you know, keep it in. You know, and go from go from there.
Okay. Well, why don't we have a little taste of that?
Sure.
Pour a couple glasses. So, in addition to your porter mash bill, your imperial porter mash bill, the small amount of Demerara, this is then matured in virgin oak and first fill ex-bourbon barrels.
Yeah, so I typically use, I prefer to use American oak.
Cheers, by the way.
Yeah, cheers, man. So, despite, primarily malted barley, and what we, say is a base malt for brewing, but really it's just, it'd be like a fairly simple brewer's malt. Then we have our specialty malts in there, which include crystal malts and Munich malts, so toasted malts. Then we have our roasted wheat in there, and then our Demerara. And then once it goes in the barrels, so the barrels for these, the one component of whiskey, because this is also two components of whiskey. There's a flavoring component and a base component. The base component's all 100% malt barley. The flavoring component is what the whiskey or the spirit is from this imperial porter recipe. So that initially starts out in virgin 100-liter barrels for 3 years.
And that's probably where a lot of like the colors come
That's
from.
exactly where the colors come from. The color comes through first, and then we transferred it, those barrels into 200-liter first fill American oak or American bourbon barrels. We also then had the other component solely in first fill American oak barrels.
Well, the nose on this is lovely. It's soft. It does have a very malty profile to it, which the base is single malt, and even your specialty malt distillate that you created, obviously malt heavy as well too. But there's some really nice chocolate tones in there too, like molasses, like puffed wheat squares, and I'm getting like these nice like ripe red berry fruit notes too, strawberry Twizzlers. There's almost a waxiness to it, but yeah, it's a nice lush, lovely, creamy, fruity profile on the nose. Oh, it's rich. So 48%, presumably non-chill filtered.
Yeah, non-chill filtered.
Yeah.
Just sediment filtered.
Sediment filtered.
Yeah. So.
The mouthfeel on that is lovely. You can feel that virgin oak presence, but without it straying into some of those bitter tones when it's left in too long. Nice bit of spice, creamy kind of creme brulee, more of those chocolate molasses, and again, like a lot of red berry fruits. That was something I wasn't really expecting on this. I'm not sure if I was expecting more citrus forward, and whether that's the distillate or if that's got more to do with like that virgin oak piece coming in.
Yeah, I think so. I think that the red berry fruits comes from the distillate. I think very early on tasting this, there was always that kind of strawberry Twizzler note that was in there.
Yeah.
So that then comes from fermentation. The spicier notes, that are there, I think that's, you could say it's some of the specialty malts, yes, but I think it's actually probably, it's more the barrel.
The cask, the American
right?
oak.
Yeah. And the combination of the virgin oak and the what's very nice about this when you're approaching components of a whiskey, knowing that you're going to eventually kind of blend it together, you could start looking at how either you soften notes or how they play together, which is nice. And at 48%, I'm really excited to kind of see how much more we could explore with this too. And do we up the proof?
Sure. Do a cask strength version.
Do a cask strength version kind of thing. What do finishing casks look like? I think that's the thing. I tended to kind of keep all that fairly simple because I see people, releasing whiskeys and they're kind of like they're doing all the add-ons right off the bat, right? And then like where do you go from there?
Yeah.
So
well, to your point before about American oak, like I love sherry casks as much as the next person. Wine casks, when they're done well, can be interesting too. But for me, like if you really want to get a sense of the spirit profile of a distillery, American oak is definitely the cleanest way to do that because it's not going to overshadow the spirit. It's not going to hide some of the character. And like certainly when you get into like say a sherry cask, you run the risk very quickly of just the sherry notes becoming the whole
Dominant.
story. So
You see it all the time. You see it all the time. And you see people come in. There has to be a sherry edition, and it's like starts becoming overwhelmingly, sherry.
hey, and I mean, there's a market for that.
course.
So if you want to give it, that's fine. But yeah, I think the Tekarra, this is a great whiskey. And I think one of the things to just really add about this too is, you guys didn't bottle your whiskey right at 3 years. Like, you've actually waited a fair bit until you had something that you felt would live up to your brand. Obviously, it's under 10 years of age because there's not,
Of course.
you don't have 10-year-old whiskey yet. But I think, one of the things worth really talking about or noting really quickly is maturation's different here than it is, say, classic Scottish maturation.
That's right.
You've got climate differences. We live in Alberta. We have massive temperature fluctuations. It also tends to be very dry. So how do you see that affecting the maturation of your whiskey?
Well, I think the dynamic nature of the environment, allows you. I don't like to go. Does it slow down? Does it speed up maturation necessarily? Things mature in their climate the way things mature. At a certain time. My experience is I found a lot. Definitely not ready at 3-4 years old. Okay, we could start looking at it. But really, that difference, like 4 to 5 years, that was a big jump.
Sure.
And then being able to kind of add those, 2 extra years on. Tekarra is a blend basically between, all the whiskeys in it are typically about 5 to 7 years. There, despite no age statement, but that's basically our pocket for this product. I think there's a ton of research that still needs to be done in Alberta. For our climate. We're incredibly dry, so we're losing evaporative losses are a bit different. Yeah. Alcohol by volume actually goes up in the barrel, not down.
Yeah.
So when we talk about the angel share and stuff,
sure.
We're actually primarily losing water. We lose some alcohol. Our staves are dry, so if you get barrels in and you leave them for any period of time, they actually shrink even more. Yeah. So there's a lot of barrel management that is needed.
And then you're also stuck. You're losing a significant portion of your first fill just to rehydrate the wood.
So right. There's a con there of, yes, you're losing more. You lose up to I've seen in some barrels you lose up to about 12%. You're losing more. However, you're typically getting further penetration into the stave.
Yeah.
Okay. So then you start looking at our temperature cycles. And how that barrel breathes in and out. Well, if you have more whiskey stuck, or penetrating the stave more, that's going back in and forth barrel. So I think there's some interesting stuff there that we should look closer to. And then however though, on another side though, and this kind of gets into the area of yes, we get cold and we get hot very quickly. But kind of when it gets into freezing temperatures under zero, there's argument, is much really happening aging wise? Is there much interaction happening between the spirit and the wood? Because
you're slowing down all the molecules.
That's right. So there could be something happening, but as far as in
but probably
the spirit,
more slowly.
But it's more slowly.
Okay.
Can you get flocculation? Do proteins drop out more? That kind of stuff. It would be interesting to see.
Cool. All right, let's talk about Tekarra. Or not Tekarra, so we did Tekarra.
Excelsior.
Let's talk about Excelsior.
Yeah.
So this is the first release of Excelsior, and I'm especially excited about this because this is a whiskey that we made like 7+ years ago now. And I believe, is this the one that nearly killed you? We don't need to get into the details on that. Oh man, here, you might need to, let's see if you've got, oh, there we go. It was sealed tight, which is good. I love the caps on these, by the way. I think more of the industry needs to look at other forms of closures other than cork. I mean, I love that sound as much as the next guy, but at the same time, you run the risk that your whiskey can oxidize more quickly if the seal's not a good one. So, the Japanese have got them on their bottles. Yeah. This is a cool cork, but so this is an interesting whiskey. Again, when we started talking about this, I remember we had some back and forth. You're like, what style of whiskey do you want to make? And I didn't really know. All I had a used bourbon barrel. I did not want it. Whenever we bought a store exclusive bourbon cask, they would ship us up as for PR purposes, they used cask, and they would dry out, and within 6 months they're falling apart.
Yeah.
So like displaying them in the store for a while worked, but then it's falling to pieces. And at a certain point, I was like, we should be doing stuff with these. So I know we made a beer that went into an ex-bourbon barrel. We put down a couple of whiskeys that went into casks that had been KWM bourbon barrels. And when we first talked about this, I wasn't really sure. And I said I wanted something different. And I think what we settled on was a hybrid peated Scottish malt barley, but then a 50-50 ratio with Alberta malted wheat.
Yeah.
So yeah, like that's what we've essentially got here. But then 7-ish years in
7 years, 1 month.
7 years, 1 month.
Yeah,
Okay.
before we bottled. So going back to that day, I still remember that we're on the lounge side of Last Best. You said, hey, would you be open to making a whiskey together?
Mm-hmm.
I was honored. I was a big fan of yours before, and it was like, yeah. So what do you want to make? And yeah, you're like, I don't know.
I had no idea. Like I just assumed we would put single malt in there or something. But I think what I loved right off the bat was that there was this eye towards doing something a little different. And so the peated malt from Scotland, Highland peated malt, then blended with, and by blend I mean the grains mixed together before fermentation, for mashing, with Alberta wheat. I think is kind of cool. And also, but it's still 100% malted. So
yeah,
could you in theory call this a single malt?
I think it could be a Canadian single malt.
Wouldn't meet Scottish.
We'd
have to call it a grain whiskey.
Yeah, we'd have to call it a grain whiskey in Scotland. And the weird thing is, I don't know why we settled on 50-50. You look at whiskey and stuff, especially the Americans, it's always 51% of something.
Sure.
So if this went 1% to the wheat, then it's a wheat whiskey.
Well, and this also, if I remember correctly, this also was a bit of a disaster because having so much wheat in there made it really hard to mash.
That's right.
And I remember like going in there with a rake, helping your brewer like physically mash this thing so that it would like turn around and actually like soak all the grains.
That's right. Yeah. Well, because Last Best, they still have a fairly archaic brewing system where still everything's very manual. They don't have rakes in their lauter tun or anything. It's all by hand or by oar most of the time.
Right.
And there's been many broken oars with frustrated stuck mashes. But yeah, with the wheat malt component, so Alberta grown wheat malted in Calgary here at Canada Malting, and then of course we have the Baird's heavy peat that we had as well, done by Baird's of Scotland up in Inverness. So kind of mixing those together, and it was at a time where once again, this is 2016, so we were kind of just into making whiskey and stuff and still exploring and just so fascinated with because we're so used to brewing, you look at the catalogs of what can we get from malt? Well, we'll get them all, right?
But it's something like a brewer's approach to making whiskey, right?
It
wasn't like, okay, we want the same consistent malt every week. We're going to do the same thing and have this consistent style. It was, let's find some interesting things to work with and see what happens. Mm-hmm. And then put them in a cask for 5 to 7 years and figure out what to do with them later.
Right? So that's exactly it. So, and then of course, with it being, a collaboration here, single cask, okay, let's see how it works. So hopefully it works, and I think it has, here, because what I like about this is that the peat isn't dominant. Like the wheat adds a nice sweetness. The peat isn't dominant. It's very approachable. I think, some of the feedback we've been getting with this whiskey is that even people who don't so we've talked about sherry, you take the other end of the spectrum, peat, there's peat lovers, and then of course there's people that hate peat as well. And people were coming up and going, I hate peat. Yeah. I'm not a peat lover. We'll try this out. And I'm like, wow, this is really approachable. We always talk about these gateway whiskeys that get people down a certain path of especially single malts. And I think this is, that's a compliment, I think, to me. I'm happy with these whiskeys, that they're elegant in nature, They don't lean to like I'm not chasing an extreme, right?
Yeah.
Because I think whiskey's got very polarizing, but there's a nice middle ground, and I think that's true to Canadian whiskey. We go, Canadian whiskey, we are, very light in flavor, but we have lots of room to add flavor into something without going to one side or the other, and chasing that. So this is what I like about these, and I think this whiskey here perfectly exemplifies that approach to it.
When you got, and quite a contrast too. I mean, the Tekarra is very rich. Like going into a lot of red fruits. This is interesting because on the nose, there's quite a prominent smoke, but it's very clean. And then it's balanced out with those nice kind of wheat tones coming through. They're adding, a really nice minerality to them as well. And the fruits on this are a little different. They're straying more into those like lemon, citrus tones than the redder fruits in the
touch of ginger spice in there. I get at times. There's times I get into there's some white wine notes, some Chardonnay notes. So I always I describe this. I described this at one time to a tasting to our shareholders is that drinking Chardonnay, at a beach fire. Kind of thing, and people kind of got it. I get that at times too. So
the smoke profile on it. I mean, to your point before, I think this is something that someone who typically doesn't like peaty medicinal whiskeys, a lot of them would taste this and not even pick up on the smoke because it's quite subtle, it's quite elegant. So both bottled 48% non-chill filter. This is a single cask bottle for Kensington Wine Market. This is the core range Tekarra. Maybe the last thing we should quickly touch on here is where this is going, and where this is going is the building of the Maligne Range distillery in Jasper restaurant. The distillery will come later again, as is tradition.
Is tradition. That'll be the second time we've done this. Same still.
Still.
Second time we have used it as a sculpture or a paperweight. But we'll get through that. We're on it. What this is part of. And this is part of the shifting, away from last best. With this whiskey brand, we're essentially going home to where the company started. We have a wonderful opportunity to take over a space right on Connaught, right on the main drag in Jasper, right across the street from the railway station. And part of it, we're building a restaurant or a whiskey experience. So this is going to be the house brand. The restaurant's going to share the same name. And that's going to be available there. There's going to be a small retail space, and of course restaurant in there that focuses not only on these whiskeys, but also others. And we're going to focus strictly on Canadian whiskey.
Well, it makes sense when you're in a tourist attraction like Jasper, attracting people from not just all over the world but all over Canada. It makes sense to really highlight something unique because visitors always love taking back something to remind them of their trips. So having some cool bespoke whiskeys, I think, is
well, and we look at it that way. Why not highlight what we're doing in Canada? People come here to go see Canada. They come to the Rockies, the Canadian Rockies, because it's the Canadian Rockies. You could go to the Rockies in the U.S. So why don't you dive into Canadian whiskey? Because what the world sees for Canadian whiskey, the Canada Clubs of the world, the Crown Royals of the world, is not everything we're doing right now. The distilling space in Alberta is very exciting right now, but across Canada it's very exciting. So what we hope to do, let alone be in Alberta, we're a very open province that we can invite all our distilling friends in. That we'll have a place, we'll have a home. For you, for people to come in and, definitely, of course, try our house whiskeys, but then get into start exploring what Canadian whiskey is. Both the big guys, the legacy guys, and the small guys. So, we'll be contacting as many small guys as we can. Hey, can you get your product to us? We'll put it on the shelf and stuff like that and showcase it. So we're really excited about that, and that collaboration part, part of things. And we'll continue with the range. Like I said, we'll keep doing the mountain theme.
Mm-hmm.
In our warehouse, we already have at least 2 more cores planned out. We have not stopped exploring. We continue to do exploratory whiskeys every year. So we have a whole bunch of unique things that are in the warehouse. We don't know what we're going to do with them yet. We have slots for them, but we're going to see. And how does this whiskey age? How does it how does it come to be? How does it bloom? And we'll start releasing that.
Very cool.
In different things. Yeah.
Well, Bryce, thanks for taking some time to introduce the Maligne Range to people with me here. Cheers.
Cheers, man. Yeah.